Our visions of the future are often shaped by popular media, and yet most future facing media, especially games, are dystopian. Are these bleak visions of the future adding to growing generational despair? Please welcome co founder and president of Eline Media, Alan Gershenfeld. We'll welcome him back, along with president of Games for Change, Susanna Pollack, in this fireside chat that explores ways we can harness the unique power of games to create evocative, aspirational, and achievable futures.
Nice to see you all and to be sitting this time. I am so pleased to be conducting this session with our old friend, Alan Gershenfeld, and you might have seen him earlier in the morning.
Nice to see you all again.
This session has hopefully an intriguing title, which we call Less Gloom, More Bloom. Is dystopian media shaping our future? And I want to give you a little background to how this session came together. So Alan and I were catching up a couple of months ago, and we were reflecting on 20 years of Games for Change. If you're not aware, Alan was our first chairman 20 years ago. So he's been along for the ride. Yes. And we're just talking about trends and things that, we've seen. And he makes this really interesting observation. And I said, wow, it was just something I hadn't really thought about before. And I thought, it was something that we could make a session and just talk about, right? It's not like you're not launching a new product and we're not talking about research. This is just really something thought-provoking that we wanted to bring out there. So Alan, I'm gonna let you share. What was it? What was that thought that came to mind?
So I think it was when I was watching Last of Us on HBO and having played the game a long time ago. And I was thinking about how we visualize our future, how we think about our future individually and collectively. And I'm not an expert in the space. Maybe there's academics here who are. So as Susanna said, this is kind of an observation that I want to throw out there and people can debate it. But I do think our collective visions of the future are often shaped by stories. And a century ago was novels, it was Jules Verne, H.G. Wells. There's a lot. I actually wrote some of the examples down, like the guy who invented the submarine. Directly said it came out of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea by Jules Verne. Martin Cooper, who invented the cell phone, directly out of Star Trek. Rocket launchers and propellers, directly out of H.G. Wells. Neil Stephenson coined the phrase metaverse, and that shaped a lot of how Silicon Valley views the metaverse. So we think about the future through really evocative science fiction and storytelling, individually and collectively. And that's kind of a powerful thought. It's kind of a powerful responsibility because we kind of live in scary times. So then I started to think about games set in the future. And I started to go through them. And it was pretty remarkable because almost every future-facing, especially AAA game, is dystopian right now. And for this conference, we put together a little video of just a montage of the most popular future-facing games. We'll run that video, and then we'll sort of deconstruct and reflect on what that means. So can we cue the video of how the game industry kind of looks at the future through these big games?
I see trees of green, red roses too. I see them bloom for me and you. And I think to myself, what a wonderful world. I see skies of blue and clouds of white, the bright blessed day, the dark sacred night. As I think to myself, what a wonderful
right? So you can all recognize, and I think you had the names of the games up there, but those are some pretty powerful games, really fun games. Why do you think there's so many dystopian futures in these games and not positive-looking societies?
So I think first of all, a lot of those are great games. And, I think dystopian games have a role. Cautionary futures are important. So it's not like everything should be one thing or another, but there just seems to be a little bit out of balance when, as far as I can tell, 100% of the big future-facing games are dystopian. So why dystopian? Narratives are often about conflict. Dystopian worlds have conflict. So that's perhaps one reason. Games have evocative visuals. Dystopian worlds have very evocative visuals. That's another reason. There's a third reason that kind of goes back to my days at Activision and kind of working on some open world games. Open world games are complex, expensive. You have to populate a lot of AI, a lot of people. And I've literally been in meetings where people said, well, we'll make it post-apocalyptic. We'll have some zombies and some stray animals. And so there's production reasons, which is kind of crazy why you have these post-apocalyptic games. And we have a ton of post-apocalyptic games. So I think it's a whole blend of creative choices. I think people see it, so they copy it. I think there's production reasons. But to me, the thought experiment is not utopian, because that's just, that doesn't feel realistic. But the phrase that I use is, can we create evocative, aspirational, and achievable worlds that are truly evocative? And to cut back to the last panel, the Playing for the Planet panel, if you were here, I think a lot about how games can inspire real-world behavior. And so if we can inspire collective visions that are really evocative, and then think about the agency and stable steps to urge those futures into existence, the way a lot of inventions came out of people seeing stuff in novels or movies or games, I think gamers could change the world. But we need those collective visions.
We talked about in our conversation about alternatives, right? So why do you think why aren't they? We talked a little bit about the drama, right? And the conflict and the budgetary reasons, which, is just kind of funny to think about, right? We'll go with zombies because you can replicate them, and right, as opposed to
and sort of barren worlds where you don't have to populate it.
Right. Really, really interesting. What kind of games? We talked about having some kind of games like construction games. Where is it easily achievable? Where do you see it? Do you see these aspirational, evocative, and what was the third thing?
Evocative, aspirational, and achievable.
The achievable
and then
part.
building the individual agency and collective agency.
You can look at some game mechanics, right?
Yeah. Well, the interesting thing about games, some of the biggest games in the world are about nurturing nature. Farming games, creation-centric games, the Minecrafts and the Roblox of the world. There are a lot of very popular games that are about creating and optimizing. Terra Nil, which is being honored here, which is a great game about, it's interesting, it's post-apocalyptic, we've destroyed the planet, but then it's a beautiful game about building sustainable ecosystems. So that's useful as well as, how do we use the fact that games can model complex systems, give you agency to play with the world. But what's often missing in a lot of the how we're inspired by the future, often it's about technology. Right. We have a business that we're a partner in called Experimental Design with the guy who designed the movie Minority Report, Alex McDowell, who's a master world builder. If you're interested in world building, he's been teaching it at USC for 10 years. And Minority Report was famous as a movie. The story goes with that movie, they didn't have the script finished, but Steven Spielberg wanted future reality, not science fiction. And they had all these futurists and experts from around the world that helped design the city of Washington, D.C. in 2040. They built out the city before they had the Philip K. Dick story. And what was interesting is many of the things that were visualized evocatively in that movie, I think there's 100 or so inventions that credit the movie. They saw it in the movie, and then they invented it in the real world. What interests me is, could we do the same thing with institutions and social systems? And so we've been thinking a lot about that, and what game genres could help inspire these worlds, and could you build some of the skills and tools and visions in the world, and then could we urge them into existence in the real world? So I do think games, in some ways, perhaps more than film and TV, has that opportunity, and yet these are all the future-facing games we're seeing.
So we were talking about Star Trek earlier and the technology it inspired, but it also was quite successful in dealing with social institutions, right? It's one of the few
Yeah,
examples out there.
I think Star Trek really looked at the human relationships,
Mhm.
and they often abstracted them in the world of their fiction. And for a lot of people, that was a world that, like, I would be okay living in that world. Whereas a lot of the worlds that we just visualized, I'm not sure I would want to live in those worlds. So I do think, we haven't had a lot of stuff like Star Trek since Star Trek. And I think that's a challenge to the media more broadly, and certainly to the game industry. So absolutely.
But we still have Star Trek. They are finding ways to
That's
reinvent
true.
that year after
true.
year. Next generation is now, I don't know which one it is. But let's talk a little bit about how this connects with your work now at Eline. You talked about the world building business, which is called
Experimental design.
experimental design. I find that's really interesting. And I know that the world building was part of your work with the Inuit, right?
Mhm.
Tribe as you build Never Alone, right? So Never Alone sits in, if you aren't familiar with the game, and won tons of awards, incredibly successful game, and you made it in partnership with Alaskan.
With the Cook Inlet Tribal Council and our Alaska Native partners.
Right, and that is part of Eline Media.
Yes.
Right?
correct.
So before we move on to other things, so what was it that brought you into the world building within Eline Media, and how you think about futures with that community?
Well, when you make games, you almost inevitably do world building, because you're designing a world that people will inhabit, unless it's a straight puzzle game or whatnot.
Right.
But if you're dealing with people and narratives and worlds, you're dealing with a world. So you have to think about the rules of the world, the systems of the world, how everything works together. And especially now in the kind of marvelization of Hollywood, we have these massive worlds that live in games and movies and in all media. Another thought piece that we've talked about is, what would be this quote marvelization of impact media? Can we come up with worlds as evocative as the Marvel world that are impact themed, that live in movies and games? And I think that's an interesting creative challenge as well. But the process starts with world building and defining the rules of the world, the systems of the world. When our games are often inspired by real people. And so we do lots of interviews, we spend lots of time together in those worlds, and then collaboratively we urge them into existence. For example, at Experimental Design, they work in the entertainment industry, but they also work in the non-entertainment industry. So for example, building 7 future cities for the American Society of Civil Engineers to say, what does civil engineering look like in 2040? How would engineering change in a floating city, or a city overrun by, say, climate migrants? I mean, all sorts of different future scenarios. And to do that, you have to do a lot of interviews. You have to understand accelerating technologies and rates of change. AI is just one of them. You have to understand cultural changes, climate changes, environmental changes. You have to look at all those systems. And then crucially, once you design all those systems, you have to put human stories in it. You have to put the people at the center. And so you then stress test the world with a lot of human stories. And it's a really fascinating practice. One that I'm still learning, but I think is world changing. I also think that world building should be in every school, because first of all, kids are into it. They're into building worlds. When we do our youth game making, kids often ask about world building and wanting to design worlds. Again, Marvel is a big part of that, or in general, these huge comic franchises. But when a child designs, or a teen or a young adult or an adult designs a world, you sort of have to do a research and become an expert in that world. So I actually think that's a fascinating thing. So if we challenge young people to create evocative, aspirational, and achievable futures in world building at all ages, that's the generation that might create the next worlds that inspire us to change the real world.
So that
It's
leads
that
us
simple.
to the third business that sits under Eline, which is Endless Studios. Can you
Yeah.
talk about that?
So we have a partner. I see some of the folks are here from Endless. We've been doing youth game making for 20 years. Our Eline Media's first product actually came out of the Institute of Play Game Lab and was part of the Games for Change ecosystem, a game called GameStar Mechanic. We've had over 1 million games created by 8 to 12-year-olds. Then we partnered with 2 teachers, I don't think they're here, to do Minecraft EDU, which we sold.
Teacher Gaming?
Teacher Gaming,
Yeah,
yeah.
right.
It was Joel and Santori. And that led us to then doing this platform called Endless, which is a slightly older version for teens and young adults. It's going to be a globally distributed, youth-led studio where youth can work on professional games, extend them and go on a coding path, a design path, art, animation, world building, get micro credentials, hopefully from universities, build a portfolio, make connections. And we really want to reach folks that wouldn't necessarily have access to university programs, because everywhere we travel in the world, young people are not just playing games, not just watching games with streamers, but they want to make games. They want to create digital media. So in some ways, this talk connects them.
Yep.
Because when you make a game, it's hard and you learn a lot. You cultivate a lot of critical skills and disciplines. And, but when you make a game about a subject, you also learn about the subject. So it's kind of a double success that I'm really intrigued by.
So when we're talking about Eline Media and some of the work and the intersections of obviously your different businesses, in the lens of this conversation about building evocative, aspirational, and achievable futures, is that coming into play in some of your new projects that you're developing?
Yeah, we have a number of projects in the pipeline. And it's interesting because some of them we're really trying to lean into purely aspirational futures, like Beyond Blue, which I think we showed in the previous panel. That when we think about the sequel, we're thinking about what does ocean exploration look like in 10 or 20 years, and how can, I mean, most of the ocean is not explored. There's amazing new technology as to how we can see, hear, and understand the ocean. We're getting, some of the scientists that we worked with on the first game are getting very close to kind of breaking the Rosetta Stone of cetacean language, like really understanding what sperm whales are communicating. I'm not sure we want to know, but I mean, it's really remarkable, the cutting edge research of how we see, hear, and sense the ocean. And so I do think that's an aspirational franchise. It's the magic of the ocean. It's here on the planet. We don't have to go out into space to discover alien life. We're discovering new life forms all the time in the ocean. So I would put that in the aspirational. And I think, as I talked about in the last panel, we want to marry that to citizen science. We want to marry that to how can you have agency to be part of exploring the ocean. But we also want to look at some of the challenges. Deep sea mining is, you're going to hear a lot about deep sea mining in the near future, because a lot of the green economy is based on certain rare minerals, and you know those exist only in certain places on the planet, but a lot of them are down in the ocean. And yet we have no idea what the implications of trying to mine. There's enormous risks. And so what are the institutions? How do we manage that is going to become one of the biggest issues that's going to hit everybody's radar, and people are going to be debating. So with the game, we can at least put that on people's radar. Right. There's going to be a lot of politics. We can kind of deconstruct what's really happening in that space. So that's an aspirational game that can have cautionary elements that are dystopian. On the other side, I mentioned briefly, we're earlier on this. We're in the design phase on a very interesting project with a guy who was here at the New York Times for 17 years. His name is Ian Urbina, and he's now gone independent. He has something called the Outlaw Ocean Project. And he's an investigative journalist. And I do think investigative journalism is critical for society. It's very challenging for newspapers to support the cost of investigative journalism. And so he's doing many innovative things around everything from podcasts to movies to TV, but he's passionate about video games. I mean, he really believes everything that we've talked about at this conference can help his investigative journalism reach a lot more people and engage deeply a lot more people. So his beat, if you will, is 7 miles outside a nation's borders. There are no real governable laws. There's treaties that are rarely enforced. Approximately 50 million people work on the ocean or are dependent on the ocean. Approximately 70 to 80% of all goods and services cross the ocean. And yet there are no really governable laws. So it is truly kind of the last frontier of the planet. So this game will explore things like sea slavery, illegal fishing, big ships, cruise ships doing illegal oil dumping, many things. If you go to his site, he has podcasts that talk about all this stuff. And when we look at subjects like that, we look for verbs, action verbs and thinking verbs. This has all the action and thinking verbs. We think there's a great, fun, provocative game, a little bit in the style of This War of Mine, if you know that game, which was very successful, but tackled some very powerful themes. But to come back to your question, one of the things we've been brainstorming with Ian and his team is aspirational elements. And so we found out there's no Doctors Without Borders at sea, which is kind of interesting. And yet there's all these ships where just basic medicine could save lives. A lot of them are fishing vessels around the world. A lot of them are quote unquote dark fleets. And so in the game, we're going to do things like invent an institution that we think should exist try to make it as evocative as possible, and then encourage the way all these people invented the cell phone or the rocket, maybe they can invent new social systems and new institutions. And that's one of the theories of change. Carolina, well, the producer on the project is here. It's one of the theories of change that we're super excited about with this project.
Well, I love that idea. And I think we know some people at Doctors Without Borders, so we'll see what we can do
That would be
to make
great.
that connection.
Yeah.
Gosh, I think we're out of time. But I will say this, as with all the speakers today, everyone is invited at 5 o'clock over to the Microsoft building for our meet and play sessions, and speakers will be there for Q&As and to continue this conversation. And, you know, this was meant to be a conversation starter.
Yeah, if you have ideas, if you disagree with the thesis or have ideas for future-facing games that we're just missing, let me know, because we're still researching this. We're still trying to understand this observation.
All right, well, thank you very much,
Thank you,
Alan.
Susanna.
It was a pleasure.